My husband set his coffee mug down on the kitchen counter, we'd picked out together 31 years earlier, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "Ruth, you wouldn't last 6 months without me." The furnace hummed quietly in the basement. My son stared at his plate. My daughter-in-law adjusted her napkin like she hadn't heard a thing. And just like that, standing in my own kitchen in Oakville, Ontario, I realized I had spent most of my adult life shrinking for people who would watch me break and never once reach out a hand. Warren Calloway slid the separation papers across the granite island with a satisfied grin, absolutely certain I would crumble. Instead, I picked up a pen and signed every page. What he didn't know was that I had already discovered the one truth he spent 3 decades trying to bury. If this story touches your heart in any way, please like and subscribe to Silent Tears Stories, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if the person you loved most told you that you were nothing without them? I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I read every single comment. People imagine marriages collapse in a single explosion. A screaming match at Christmas dinner, an affair discovered on someone's phone, a suitcase thrown onto the front porch. But mine died the way ice cracks on a lake in early spring, slowly, silently, until one ordinary afternoon you step forward and the whole surface gives way beneath you. When I met Warren Calloway, I was 26 and working the pastry counter at a small cafe on Lakeshore Road in Burlington. He had broad shoulders, a laugh that carried across rooms, and the kind of confidence that made you feel chosen just because he noticed you. He sold commercial real estate across the GTA and talked about the future like it was something he personally controlled. The first time he brought me flowers, he remembered I loved peonies. Not roses, not tulips, peonies. That kind of attention felt like love to me back then. We married within a year. For a while, everything felt honest and warm. We bought a modest townhouse near Bronte Creek. Warren worked long hours downtown while I kept baking. Croissants, butter tarts, sourdough loaves that made the whole house smell like Sunday mornings. We danced in the kitchen to Gordon Lightfoot on the radio. We laughed over burnt Thanksgiving turkeys. We whispered about baby names while snow piled against the windows. Then Derek was born and everything began to shift so gradually I almost missed it happening. At least one of us should stay home. Warren told me when Derek was 5 months old. Daycare in this city costs more than rent. It sounded reasonable, temporary. Warren promised it wouldn't be forever. You can go back to work whenever you're ready, Ruthie. So I stayed home. I packed lunches. I drove Derek to hockey practice at 6 in the morning. I scrubbed grass stains from soccer jerseys. I remembered every dentist appointment, every school project deadline, every teacher's name, every grocery list, every invisible task that kept our family running like clockwork. And slowly, Warren stopped recognizing any of it as work. He started calling himself the provider. At first it felt harmless, then it became something sharper. One evening, maybe 14 years ago now, I mentioned the dishwasher had been leaking for weeks and asked if we could replace it. Warren sighed heavily. Ruth, do you have any idea how much I spend keeping this household running? Derek was maybe 13. He laughed softly, automatically, like his father's tone was perfectly normal. I laughed too. That's the part that still keeps me awake some nights. I helped teach my own son that dismissing me was acceptable. Over the years, Warren became the gravitational center of everything. His schedule dictated ours. His stress mattered most. His opinions became facts, and mine became interruptions. If I bought myself anything, a book, a sweater, a pair of shoes on clearance, he questioned it. You really needed that? If I forgot something minor, he'd shake his head slowly. What would you do without me? At first, he said it playfully. Then one day the playfulness disappeared and I didn't even notice when it left. By the time I turned 60, I couldn't remember the last time anyone asked what I wanted. Not what I cooked, not what I cleaned, not what I organized, what I wanted. Warren had become very successful by then. We'd moved into a larger home in Oakville with a stone facade and tall windows overlooking a ravine. He drove a black Audi. Neighbors admired him at backyard barbecues and church fundraisers. You're lucky to have a man like Warren. I heard that sentence for years. Lucky, as if comfort erased humiliation. As if a beautiful house on a tree-lined street could replace dignity. The strange thing about emotional cruelty is that it almost never looks dramatic from the outside. There are no bruises, no police reports. Just tiny cuts, tiny humiliations, tiny moments that accumulate until you barely recognize the woman staring back at you in the bathroom mirror. One afternoon, I stood in our bedroom holding a shopping bag. I'd bought myself a cardigan on sale at a shop in Port Credit. $45. Warren glanced at the receipt and frowned. $45 for a sweater you don't need? I stared at him. He'd purchased a new set of golf clubs that same month, $2,300. But somehow my cardigan required justification. I just thought it looked nice, I said quietly. He shook his head. You don't understand money, Ruth. That sentence followed me for years. Meanwhile, I was the one stretching grocery budgets, clipping coupons, giving up every personal dream so Warren could build his career without a single domestic concern. None of that counted. By the time Derek married Vanessa, the family dynamic had been carved deep into stone. Vanessa was polished, careful with her words, quick to read the room. She never insulted me directly, in some ways that made it worse, because she watched Warren belittle me and immediately understood which side held power. Warren works so hard, she'd say admiringly at Sunday dinners. While I stood behind the kitchen island after spending 5 hours cooking the meal sitting in front of her. One Thanksgiving, I carried the turkey to the table while everyone else watched football in the living room. Warren glanced toward me and chuckled. Ruthie would fall apart if she ever had to hold down a real job again. Vanessa smiled politely. Derek smirked into his beer. Something cracked quietly inside me that night. Not loudly. Like a hairline fracture in a load-bearing wall. The older I got, the more invisible I became, except when Warren needed something. Ruth, where's my blue tie? Ruth, did you call the insurance company? Ruth, why isn't dinner ready? I became a function instead of a person, and somehow I let it happen. People ask why women stay in marriages like that. The answer is never simple. Sometimes you stay because you remember who they used to be when the peonies still meant something. Sometimes you stay because you're terrified. Sometimes you stay because after decades of being told you can't survive alone, you start believing it too. But something had been shifting inside me long before those separation papers hit the kitchen counter. I'd started noticing things. Warren taking phone calls on the back deck with the door shut. His laptops snapping closed the moment I entered the room. Financial documents vanishing from the filing cabinet in his home office. One afternoon, while tidying his desk, I found a bank envelope jammed beneath a stack of old magazines. I almost left it alone. I wish I had, because the moment I opened it, the ground beneath my marriage disappeared. The account balance showed over $340,000. In Warren's name alone. My hands started shaking. We'd always shared finances, or at least I believed we had. But the mailing address on the statement wasn't our home. It was a private post office box in Mississauga. After 31 years of marriage, I realized I had no idea who my husband actually was. I didn't confront Warren right away. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Business account, retirement fund, something rational. Women like me become specialists at explaining away terrible things. After enough years, denial starts sounding like survival. So I folded the statement carefully, placed it back exactly where I found it, and waited. Once you start watching someone who's been lying to you, you see everything. Warren guarded his phone constantly. He stepped outside to answer calls. He came home late smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his usual brand. But none of that hurt as much as what happened the following Sunday evening. Derek and Vanessa came for dinner around 6. I'd cooked all afternoon. Roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, homemade rolls, maple apple crisp, Warren's favorite. Or it used to be. I stood in the kitchen, brushing melted butter over the rolls when Vanessa walked in carrying a bottle of wine. "You really went all out," she said, already distracted by her phone. Through the doorway I could hear Warren talking loudly to Derek about investment properties and stock portfolios. Money, status, performance. The same conversation every time now. Dinner started normally enough. Then Derek mentioned rising grocery prices. Warren laughed and leaned back in his chair. "Good thing I've handled the finances all these years. Your mother would have had us bankrupt by 2015. Vanessa gave a soft laugh. Derek shook his head with a half grin. The familiar humiliation settled over the table like fog. Normally I would have smiled weakly and changed the subject. But that night, something felt different. Maybe because of the bank statement. Maybe because I was finally exhausted from swallowing every insult like cold medicine. I managed our household budget just fine for 30 years, I said quietly. Warren looked genuinely startled that I'd spoken. Then he chuckled. Ruth, come on! He waved his wine glass carelessly. You couldn't survive 6 months without me, and we both know it. The table went still. Vanessa glanced at Derek. Warren kept going. That's not an insult, sweetheart. It's just reality. You haven't worked a real job in 3 decades. You wouldn't last a season on your own. Derek shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Not one word. I looked at my son. The little boy whose hand I held on his first day at Westdale Elementary, whose lunches I packed every morning for 12 years, and realized he had learned to measure my value through his father's eyes. That hurt worse than anything Warren ever said to me. She'd never survive without me. Not might not. Not probably wouldn't. Never. Like I was helpless, fragile, useless, I became aware of the kitchen clock ticking behind me, the hum of the refrigerator, the smell of rosemary from the roast. Those ordinary details burned into my memory because somewhere deep inside, I knew my marriage ended at that table. Not because Warren insulted me. He'd done that for years. It ended because everyone at the table let him. I slowly set down my fork. Then, to my own surprise, I smiled. A small, calm smile that seemed to confuse Warren more than anger ever would. You're right, I said softly. The entire table looked up. Warren blinked. What? You're absolutely right. Satisfaction spread across his face. But inside me, something cold and sharp and patient finally woke up. Because for the first time in decades, I stopped trying to defend myself to people who had already decided not to see me. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone Warren never imagined I could be. Quiet, observant, methodical. He barely noticed the difference, because he'd spent so many years underestimating me. I photographed financial documents before he woke up. I copied records while he showered. I searched filing cabinets, old tax returns in the basement, and what I found made my blood run cold. There wasn't just one hidden account. There were multiple transfers. Thousands of dollars moved gradually over 7 years, always carefully, always invisible. One evening, sitting at the dining room table, pretending to read, I heard Warren say casually, "You've been quiet lately." I told him I was tired. He smirked. "You're still upset about dinner." Then he leaned back confidently. "You know a divorce would destroy you financially, right? Not concern, a threat. You seem very confident about that," I said quietly. He laughed. "Because it's true." Then he kissed the top of my head like I was a child and walked upstairs. That night I went through his office one final time and found wire transfer confirmations, repeated movements into the hidden account, and one transfer that stopped my breathing. $92,000! The description line read, property proceeds. We hadn't sold any property, at least not that I knew of. Then I found the deed. Years earlier, Warren and I had jointly inherited a small cottage property near Muskoka from his aunt. Apparently, Warren had sold it without telling me. The money went straight into his private account. And tucked behind those papers, I found something else. A refinancing document bearing my signature. Except I'd never signed it. The next morning, I drove to a family law office in downtown Hamilton. Lorraine Baxter was sharp-eyed, silver-haired, and missed absolutely nothing. When I showed her the bank statements and the forged signatures, her expression changed immediately. Sorry, Ruth, she corrected herself, adjusting her glasses. How long have you been married? 31 years. And you had no access to these accounts? No. Do you know all his retirement holdings? No. Is your name on all properties? I hesitated. I wasn't sure. Lorraine leaned back slowly. Being a stay-at-home wife for decades does not make you powerless. Courts recognize unpaid labor inside a marriage. My throat tightened because nobody had said anything remotely like that to me in years. Gather everything, she told me. Tax returns, property records, bank statements, and do not confront him yet. People hiding money become unpredictable when they feel exposed. The drive home through the QEW traffic felt surreal. For the first time in decades, I wasn't reacting to Warren's behavior. I was preparing. That changed something inside me permanently. The night I left Warren and moved into a small apartment above a florist shop in Dundas felt unbearably quiet. The radiator clanked. The carpet smelled like old winters, but it was mine. That thought both comforted and terrified me. The second night alone, I sat on the kitchen floor eating soup from a container, because I hadn't unpacked bowls yet, and I cried harder than I'd cried in my entire life. Not polite tears, the kind that leave your ribs aching. I cried for my younger self, for wasted decades, for every time I apologized just to keep peace. The next morning, my old friend Faye Prescott called before 8. We hadn't spoken properly in nearly 7 years, not because we fought, but because Warren had slowly isolated me from anyone who reminded me of who I used to be. "You're coming to the shop," Faye said firmly. That wasn't a question, was it? Nope. Faye owned a small cafe near the waterfront in Burlington, close to where I'd worked all those years ago. Walking into her kitchen, warm smells wrapped around me instantly. Butter, sugar, fresh bread. My chest ached. Faye crossed her arms. "My baker quit last month. I need help." I laughed nervously. "Faye, I'm 63 years old. I haven't worked professionally in—" "Oh, stop!" She grabbed an apron from a hook and tossed it at me. "Make something." For a moment, fear hit me so hard I nearly put it down. What if Warren was right? What if I really had become useless? Slowly, I tied the apron around my waist. The moment my fingers touched the flour bins and mixing bowls, something happened. My body remembered before my mind caught up. Measurements, textures, timing. I moved almost instinctively. Faye watched silently while I prepared butter tart filling and cinnamon roll dough from memory. An hour later, the kitchen filled with warmth. Faye tore off a piece of cinnamon roll while it was still hot. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God, Ruth." I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride, real pride. Not for being a good wife, for myself. The first weekend we sold my pastries, I woke at 4 in the morning to bake. Cinnamon rolls, lemon loaf, blueberry scones, maple pecan tarts. By 7, the tiny kitchen smelled like butter and sugar so strongly it wrapped around me like a memory. Customers arrived and every insecurity came crashing back. What if nobody bought anything? What if this was all pathetic? A woman about my age approached the display first. "Did Faye hire a new baker?" Faye pointed at me proudly. "Ruth made everything." The woman smiled warmly. "Well, Ruth's got a gift." She bought 2 cinnamon rolls and a lemon loaf. Then another customer came, and another. Not huge amounts, nothing dramatic, but enough that I could breathe again. That afternoon, Faye handed me an envelope. My share, $387. My eyes burned. It might not sound life-changing, but to me it was monumental, because for the first time in over 30 years, I had earned money that belonged entirely to me. Not household money. Not Warren's money. Mine. Weeks blurred together. I rented time in a community kitchen during off hours. My feet ached constantly. I ruined batches adjusting recipes for larger ovens. But customers kept returning, asking for specific items by name. "Did Ruth make the apple cake today?" Hearing my own name attached to something people valued stirred something alive inside me. Then one Friday, my phone buzzed. "Warren." "Ethan. Derek said you're working now." The way he said working made it sound ridiculous. "I'm baking," he laughed softly. "For money? Ruth, come on. This little hobby isn't going to support you." I gripped the phone tighter. Something strange happened. Instead of hearing authority in his voice, I heard fear. Tiny, hidden, but there. "You sound worried," I said quietly. Silence. Then, "Don't embarrass yourself, Ruth." That night, lying in my tiny apartment, I realized something important. Warren didn't just want me dependent. He needed me doubtful. Because the moment I started believing in myself again, his version of me stopped existing. The Saturday Warren showed up at the Hamilton Farmers Market started like any other cold October morning. I had loaded trays of pastries into my car and set up a small booth between a honey vendor and a soap maker. Faye helped arrange everything neatly. Apple cakes in the center, pecan bars on the left, cinnamon rolls near the front because people always bought those first. A handwritten sign read Ruth's Kitchen. The name still felt fragile. Then around noon, I saw the black Audi. Daniel, Warren, parked along the curb and walked toward my booth wearing an expensive coat and sunglasses despite the overcast sky. He glanced around the market with obvious judgment. "Well," he said loudly, "look at this." Several nearby customers turned immediately. "What are you doing here?" I asked. He picked up a cookie, inspecting it like something cheap at a yard sale. "This is what you're doing now." Faye crossed her arms. "She's working, Warren." He smirked. "Cute little hobby." Then louder. "You had a beautiful house, financial security, and now you're standing in the cold selling muffins to strangers." Humiliation flooded through me. A few customers looked horrified. One older woman quietly put back the pastry she'd been holding and walked away. But something underneath the shame stirred, because suddenly I realized Warren hadn't driven across town to laugh at me. He came because my independence bothered him. He wouldn't have made the trip for a woman he truly considered powerless. "You done?" I asked quietly. He blinked. "Are you done humiliating me in public today?" For the first time since arriving, he looked thrown off balance. Then he scoffed. "I'm trying to save you from embarrassing yourself." "No," I said softly. "You're trying to make sure I still feel afraid of you." The silence around us became heavy and immediate. Warren's jaw tightened. Then he tossed the cookie back onto the tray and turned away. As he walked off, I noticed Derek standing near the far edge of the parking lot beside his truck, watching. Our eyes met briefly. Instead of walking toward me, he followed his father. That hurt more than anything Warren ever said. But that evening, my phone rang. A woman's voice. "Hi, is this Ruth from the farmer's market? I saw what happened today. I recorded part of it. Your ex-husband was being awful. I posted it online. People are supporting you." Fear hit me first. Then I opened social media. The video was already spreading locally. And the comments stunned me. "Her pastries are incredible. That man is emotionally abusive. Supporting this bakery immediately." She handled herself with so much dignity. For years, Warren made me believe people would see me as pathetic without him. But strangers were seeing strength in me I couldn't even recognize in myself yet. The next morning, I woke to 47 new orders in my inbox. Everything accelerated after that. A local CBC radio host mentioned the video and invited listeners to support the bakery woman who stood her ground. The following Saturday, the line at my booth stretched down the block. A woman hugged me and whispered, "You gave me courage to leave too." That shook me deeply because I still didn't fully understand what people were seeing. I still felt terrified most days. Then came Nadine Tremblay. An elegant woman in a cream wool coat had been watching me for 20 minutes from a bench near the market. She eventually approached after the crowd thinned. "Are you Ruth Calloway?" "Yes. Nadine Tremblay." She extended her hand. Something about her confidence made me straighten unconsciously. She ran a hospitality investment group across southern Ontario. Restaurants, boutique inns, artisan food brands. "Have you ever considered opening a permanent location?" she asked. I nearly choked. "This is already overwhelming enough. Overwhelming and impossible are not the same thing." She handed me a business card. "I invest in women rebuilding. Because 30 years ago, someone invested in me when nobody else took me seriously." Before leaving, she paused. "When you're ready to think bigger, call me." Faye grabbed the card from my hand. "Ruth, Nadine Tremblay is a very big deal." I laughed nervously. "She probably says that to everyone." Faye stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "No, she absolutely does not." That evening, exhausted, I returned home and noticed Warren's black Audi parked across the street. He sat inside watching. The moment he realized I'd seen him, he looked away. But not before I caught his expression. Not arrogance. Confusion. Maybe even fear. Warren expected me to fail publicly. What he never prepared for was the possibility that people might believe in me more than I had ever believed in myself. Lorraine Baxter called days later, asking me to come in immediately. Her tone made my stomach drop. In her office, she spread documents across the desk. "These transfers began almost 8 years ago," she said. "Warren wasn't just hiding money. He was systematically moving marital assets into structures designed to limit your access during any divorce." I stared at the papers. "He planned this?" "I believe Warren anticipated ending the marriage long before you did." 31 years, and somewhere during those years, my husband had quietly been preparing for life after me while still sleeping beside me every night. How much? Potentially over $400,000. Then one specific signature caught my eye. My name, except not my handwriting. "I never signed this." Lorraine exhaled slowly. "We had a forensic handwriting analyst review several documents. Ruth, we believe Warren forged your signature on multiple occasions." I physically recoiled. Because even after everything, part of me still couldn't believe the man I'd loved for 3 decades had calculated my erasure this precisely. Weeks later, Derek came to the bakery after closing. He looked exhausted, older somehow. He sat across from me at a corner table and said quietly, "Dad's been lying, worse than we thought." He showed me emails between Warren and a financial advisor, dated 4 years back. One line read, "She'll never understand the financial structure anyway." Another from Warren, "Ruth's too emotionally dependent to contest anything." I stared at those words until my vision blurred. Not because they surprised me anymore, because of how cold they were. Warren didn't just underestimate me privately. He built entire strategies around my supposed weakness. Then Derek said something that changed everything between us. "I used to think you exaggerated things about Dad. He always seemed so confident." His voice cracked slightly. "But now I realize you weren't being dramatic. You were being destroyed. Hearing your child finally name your pain correctly after years of silence does something complicated to your heart. Part relief, part grief so deep it has no bottom." "I laugh sometimes," he admitted quietly. "At his jokes about you. You were raised inside it," I said. "That changes what feels normal." The first Second Rise Bakery storefront opened on a snowy Friday morning in downtown Burlington, 6 months later. A corner space with exposed brick, warm lighting, and wide windows that fogged from oven heat on winter mornings. The sign above the entrance read Second Rise Bakery. Every time I looked at those words, my chest tightened, because that bakery wasn't built from revenge. It was built from recovery. Faye was already there, tying on her apron when I arrived before sunrise. Janice Okafor, 68 and recently widowed, was arranging display trays. Mabel Chen, a retired school cafeteria worker supporting her granddaughter, was prepping dough in the back. Every woman inside that kitchen had survived something. And, standing among them, I felt something I hadn't expected. Community. Real, unearned, generous community. The doors opened at 8. By 8:15, the line reached the sidewalk. A local TV reporter arrived for a short interview Nadine had arranged. I sat nervously under bright lights while the reporter asked, "So Ruth, what inspired Second Rise Bakery?" I looked around the bakery, at Faye, at Janice, at Mabel laughing with customers, and answered honestly. I think some women spend so much time taking care of everyone else that they eventually forget they matter too. And sometimes life breaks your heart badly enough that you finally realize surviving isn't enough anymore. You want to live again. The interview aired that evening. Business exploded. And through all of it, Warren grew increasingly desperate. First bitter texts, "Enjoy your 15 minutes." Then the tone shifted entirely. "Ruth, maybe we should talk. I think we both made mistakes. I miss you." After years of coldness, humiliation, and betrayal, suddenly he missed me. Funny how that works, once the world stops agreeing with someone. One Tuesday afternoon, Warren walked into the bakery, looking desperate and exhausted. He told me he'd lost money, bad investments, collapsed deals, the same hidden accounts he'd been gambling with. He might need to sell the house. Then he said it. I thought maybe we could work something out. I stared at him. "You're asking me for financial help." His face flushed. "That's not what I'm saying. It's exactly what you're saying. We were married 31 years, and during those years you financially prepared to abandon me." Silence. Then I said quietly, "You spent years telling me I couldn't survive without you, and now you're standing in my bakery asking the woman you called weak to save you." For several moments, he had no response at all. Then he said something that revealed more than he intended. "I didn't think you'd change this much." "You know what changed?" I asked. "I stopped seeing myself through your eyes." Something cracked across his expression. Not dramatically. Like a man realizing his authority has vanished completely. "I did love you," he said quietly. Part of me believed him, because emotional manipulators often do love you, in the only broken way they know how. But love without respect eventually becomes possession. And possession destroys everything it touches. "I loved you too," I said. "But loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing yourself so they can feel powerful." Warren looked around the bakery one final time, at the customers, the warmth, the life I'd rebuilt without him. Then he walked toward the door. Before reaching it, he paused. "So what now?" I thought about fear, about survival, about the terrified woman crying on her apartment kitchen floor months earlier. Then I answered honestly. Now I keep living. 3 years after my divorce, Second Rise Bakery had 4 locations across southern Ontario. Sometimes saying that aloud still feels unreal. Not because I doubt it anymore, but because I remember exactly who I was when this story began. A woman sitting silently at a dinner table while her husband laughed about how helpless she'd be without him. Now my mornings begin before sunrise, with coffee, inventory lists, and warm kitchens filled with women rebuilding their own lives. He started a paid apprenticeship program for women, over 50 re-entering the workforce after divorce, widowhood, or decades of caregiving. Because I learned something powerful during my own rebuilding. Women are never too old to begin again. They're often just too exhausted from carrying everyone else. One autumn afternoon, I received a letter from Warren. No return address. His handwriting on the envelope. Ruth, I was wrong about you. I spent most of my life believing control was the same thing as strength. I thought if I made myself important enough, necessary enough, then nobody could leave me. Instead, I became someone who drove away the people who loved me most. Tears stung behind my eyes. Not because the words fixed anything. Some apologies arrived too late to repair the damage they caused. At the bottom, he wrote, "If you're willing, I'd like to see you once more." We met at a quiet park near the lake in Burlington, where we used to walk when Derek was small. Warren looked older, not just physically but deeper, like life had finally forced him to stop performing strength and simply sit inside himself honestly. "You look happy," he said. "I am." He nodded slowly. "I'm glad." Then, "You know what scares me most now? That I wasted so many years needing to feel superior instead of simply loving the people around me." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I answered honestly. "I think forgiveness isn't forgetting what happened. I think it's refusing to let pain become your identity forever." Warren lowered his head slightly. Then he asked quietly, "Was I really that terrible?" I looked at the man I'd once loved more than anyone alive. "You spent years trying to convince me I was nothing without you, and eventually, you started believing your own cruelty was normal." The sun dipped lower over the lake. Wind moved through the bare November trees, and I understood something with absolute certainty. Warren Calloway once believed I could never survive without him. But the moment I stopped believing his version of me, I became free enough to build a life richer than anything I ever imagined. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this: never confuse dependence with love. Real love does not shrink you. It does not humiliate you. It does not require you to become smaller so someone else can feel important. And no matter your age, no matter how many years you've already spent surviving, it is never too late to rebuild your life. Sometimes what feels like destruction is actually rescue. I thought divorce at 63 would ruin me. Instead, it introduced me to the woman I'd abandoned decades earlier. The woman who still had dreams, still had talent, still had value that no one else's opinion could take away. So if you're watching this feeling trapped, invisible, or afraid to start over, please hear me. Your life is not over, and your worth was never dependent on someone else's ability to recognize it. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe to Silent Tears Stories, and I'd truly love to hear from you. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after someone made you feel small? Where are you watching from today? And what time is it there right now?